Hello and welcome to The Stack. This week we celebrate Hotel Room Stationery, a magazine about street photography, and we speak with a man that is considered an Italian magazine legend. Enjoy the show. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. I have a feeling that Stack listeners appreciate as much as I do the beauty of hotel stationery. When I arrive in my hotel room, I always look out for a block of notes or any type of beautiful paper. It is for me a big, big plus. For artist Michael McGregor, it is the same. In his beautiful book, Room Service, Michael shows us some of the illustrations he did on stationery from some of the top hotels worldwide, from the Chateau Marmont in LA to the Hotel Meurice in Paris. Here is Michael telling me the allure of hotel stationery.
For me, hotels are places of fantasy, of escape, of desire, and, full of elegance and allure. And paper is another touch point for all of those things. And often, for me, if I see the paper for Hotel de Maurice or Hotel de Crillon, even if you've never been to those places, you can kind of understand how magical and beautiful they really are. It's sort of like, I guess it's like another architectural touch point on paper.
And tell me about the book, Room Service. So the book contains 118 of your drawings, and they were made between 2016 and 2023. When you started, you knew it would become a book, or was it something that say, you know what, I have this incredible material, let me start collecting? I wondered, where did you have the idea? When did you actually start the whole process?
I guess when I first started working on these drawings, I envisioned a book. I felt like the best way to collect them and exhibit them would be in book form, because there were so many different places and there was so much variety that I kind of felt like if you were to see an exhibition of them, it would work. You could easily go from frame to frame and kind of feel like you were hopping through the world. But something about the page flip in particular, I've been working on them for a long time. There's probably over 500. There's only 118 or whatever in the book. So ultimately, I just kind of felt like, well, this is how this is going to have to live. And maybe too, because they were all done on individual sheets of paper when I was traveling, I was carrying these stacks of paper that almost felt like a book.
What do you draw with, Michael? Is it every single of those drawings the same material did you use?
Most of them are colored pencil, almost all of them. I used to use pastels, but I found that while traveling, they tended to rub a little bit and smear. So I moved to colored pencil as a sort of, I guess, a little bit cleaner method that would be more preserved while the works were in transit.
And from what I can see, of course, there's a huge variety of hotels, but I can see that there, I don't know, maybe some of your favorites. There's quite a few from the Sunset Tower Hotel. Doesn't necessarily the hotels that are here are some of your favorites as well, or sometimes it's quite random in a way?
I guess I wouldn't say that they're random. In fact, some of the more random ones didn't make it into the book. What I'm looking for is usually an intuition, an intuitive sense that, to me, a place feels greater than its own self. So the Sunset Tower, I've been there many times, and I've had a personal relationship, with that building. So there's definitely a little bit more, I guess, lived experience. And I feel like the greater the lived experience in a place, the stronger the memory and the stronger the work that's attached to it is.
Oh, that's fair. That's a very good point. And sometimes, perhaps not necessarily, you tell me, but I think the drawing does connect to the place in a way. So, for example, Parker Palm Springs, you have, two pink chairs with, lovely cocktails and an umbrella on top as well. The Breakers from Florida, you have some, how do you say, a protection cream against the sun as well.
Yeah. Sunscreen.
Exactly.
Water Babies, SPF as a child. I don't know why. Maybe because it was called Water Babies. It just has a good name. And I guess when we would go to the beach or to the pool, my mom would, we would line up in a row and she would cover us in sunscreen, usually not rub it in very well. So we'd be super white. But that was usually the symbol that, okay, it's fun in the sun for the rest of the day. Even when I see that drawing, I can almost smell that SPF.
I love the smell of SPF, actually.
Me too. I think it's one of the best things out there.
And there's some recurring motifs. I love macaws as well, and I think I've spotted 2 or 3 perhaps. I have this one from Claridge's. I thought it was so chic. It's a kind of a large macaw kind of covering. Do you have a few kind of motifs that are your favorites, like for example macaws?
I love birds. I mean, for a variety of reasons, I think they're beautiful. They also just happen to be very fun to draw, which is, a bonus. It's funny, I'm in my studio right now. I'm looking at 2 giant macaws that are going in my next exhibition. And I kind of thought, I was actually at Claridge's when I drew that, and I kind of thought, wouldn't it be funny if somebody just came in with a parrot? Because every once in a while, sometimes you're in the city and you just see a guy walking around and he's got a little parakeet on his shoulder, and it's not a big deal. I was kind of hoping that somebody would just walk into the hotel and check in and also just have a macaw on their shoulder that would also need to check in.
And you mentioned your next exhibition. What can you tell us? Will it be related to this somehow, or is completely different?
It is related. It's called Voyage, and it's in New York. It contains about 25 drawings that were in the book. The paintings that are in the show are, I guess the drawings were kind of used as a jumping off point. So there's a lot of paintings in the show that are references that reference some of the drawings. For instance, there's a painting of the suitcase covered in stickers. That's, I think, the first page of the book. There's a painting of an ex-lover's Chanel bag on a door. That's also in the book. So I think after I had collected all of these drawings for room service, I was going back through them for the publication date. I kind of thought that, some of these, I think they were their full vision as drawings, but I wanted to make them larger and I wanted to make them in oil paint. So they didn't start off as studies or anything, but a lot of them sort of became over time, I guess, the first version, the demo version of a painting.
By the way, Michael, do you have a favorite hotel or a favorite hotel stationery? They might be even connected, perhaps.
I have both. My favorite hotel is a tiny little hotel in Big Sur in California called Deachin's. It's built out of all old redwood trees nestled in the redwoods, just off of the Pacific. And it's not very glamorous, but it's very beautiful. And it feels like, I don't know, it feels like you're in California in the 19th century in the gold rush or something. It has a very, very unique spirit. It's not posh. It's not gilded or there's no room service, but it's a place that is so magical. It doesn't need any of those things.
And stationery, which one is your favorite?
Stationery.
Controversial question.
It's tough. It's really tough. I think Le Maurice in Paris is probably the best, or at least my favorite. They've changed it many times over the years, but all of them are good, which to me is always a sign. It's funny, Claridge's has changed theirs a few times. They've had a couple different logo shifts. So if you look through the archives, you can see Claridge's 90s period, which isn't as sexy or classic as it should be. But I do love the Sunset Tower and the Chateau. To me, they're places that are particularly Hollywood. No matter where you are in the world, if you hear the Chateau Marmont, you kind of know what that means. And it comes with a lot of attitude and history and flavor. And that tends to be, I think for them in particular, it's very much tied to their logo type, which is really strong and beautiful. And the second that you see it, you can kind of imagine going up the little hill into the ballet area and, escaping Hollywood.
There's a fabulous one. I just opened, a page randomly, but I've spotted before the Carlyle with the amazing Cher in Moonstruck. I mean, that's a fantastic one as well.
Thank you. That's I'm addicted to Moonstruck. I watch it probably, I don't know, maybe like 40 times a year. It's part of a series of films that when I'm traveling and I'm alone and kind of don't know what to do, or I feel really far away from home, I watch Moonstruck. I watch Casablanca, I watch Chungking Express. These films are kind of burned into my memory. I could watch them on silent and know exactly what's going on. And I think I was feeling a little bit homesick watching that in a hotel, and felt like maybe I should sketch Cher jumping off of the moonlight.
Thank you, Michael. What a pleasure. Room Service is published by Paragon Books, and if you like Michael's work, he currently has an exhibition at Hashimoto Contemporary in New York City. We now hear from Shane Taylor and Josh Adgus, founding editor duo of Framelines, one of the only contemporary print magazines dedicated to street photography. As street photographers themselves, with a strong online following, the pair have sought to bring the best contemporary artists in the genre away from our tiny phone screens and back onto beautifully printed paper for their audience to enjoy. Framelines has been published quarterly since 2021, with this week seeing the release of their 8th issue, featuring regular Vogue and New York Times photographer Daniel Arnold. Here is Monocle's Gunnar Gronlund with Shane Taylor and Josh Adgus.
I guess I want to go back a little bit and just ask, what drew you to the street in the first place?
Initially, I went on a few trips to New York, maybe about 10, 12 years ago. And then I somehow stumbled across Daniel Arnold's photographs and was like, wow, I didn't know. I did a little bit of I learned about street photography at college. I took a A-level in photography and then just kind of forgot about it for a long time, and then stumbled across Daniel Arnold's photographs on this trip to New York and was like, oh yeah, street photography is a thing and that can be done in London, and then came back and just started walking with my camera, and then it turned out street photography is this whole big thing. And then bumped into Shane one day.
Yeah, I kind of discovered it in design college. So I studied design, visual communications in Dublin. And they had a huge photography library, which I ended up in one day. And I was just flipping through all these books. And I found books by Winogrand and Eggleston. And I just discovered that this was a thing, like Josh said, that, before that, I had no idea people took candid photos in the street like that. So I tried it myself in Dublin and just got hooked.
I mean, street photography now is such a huge thing online, and sort of we're consuming it digitally for the most part. Why did you decide that you really wanted to showcase street photography in print specifically? I mean, I noticed on your website that you don't release the digital versions until the next issue is out. So you seem very dedicated to print. Why is that?
Yeah, that's a very intentional thing with us, because one of the reasons we started the magazine initially was as an alternative to Instagram, because most people were consuming street photos on Instagram on a tiny phone, an inch wide, and they just weren't seeing the details in the photographs, especially photos that have a lot of hidden details in them that take a while to kind of consume all those details. So they're missing out on the real art behind this thing. So we figured if we could just convey that in print in a nice big magazine, which we spend a lot of time making the images look good. There's no text over the images. The photos have a lot of emphasis on them. And that's where we landed with it.
Yeah, it's really born out of not wanting to exist on a phone, really, for much longer. That's that was the initial chat, wasn't it? I think initially I was like, can we just make a joint? I think it's very selfishly, I was like, let's just show our own photos.
Yeah,
and
sure.
And then you were like, no, let's show other people.
And I read this thing in the first issue. It was in the essay of Melissa Breyer. Mm-hmm. So she said that a Google search for street photography at that time of issue 1 delivered about 4.7 billion search results. And I checked. It now delivers about 7.9 billion search results. So why do you think street photography is sort of having a bit of a moment?
Maybe it's something to do with coming out of lockdowns and people are enthusiastic about seeing each other again. Yeah. And those kind of small moments of you're sitting in a cafe and you're doing some people watching, which is something everyone does. We just do it with cameras, I guess. And I think there's been a lot of popularity. There's been a lot of exhibitions, even recently in London here in the Photographers Gallery. They've had exhibitions with Helen Levitt. And people are becoming more aware of the history of this art form.
And since you guys are just such a small team, it's just the two of you, editorially, the way you approach the magazine, do you think of it more as classic sort of you're profiling other street photographers, or do you think of it more as a collaboration? Are you trying to bring them in and tell a story with them?
I think in terms of editing the magazine, what we do like to do is mix someone who is well established and has been doing this for decades and is very well known. And we mix those with smaller, lesser known photographers. And we kind of mix it under different themes, like we might do a New York issue or an LA issue or a London issue. And just seeing all these different people sort of mesh together under one magazine is kind of interesting to see that, because you see decades and decades of work that's essentially from the same kind of perspective.
I think that we also think about maybe just honing on a person's specific project or give like a broader overview of their work. It kind of depends on how the photographer wants to present themselves as well. We give them a lot of flexibility with the images they include as well.
And when you do go back and sort of highlight photographers who've had decade-long careers, when you look back at those photos, at those photographers, do you think that street photography has had to change a lot since their day because of everyone's more sort of ubiquitous awareness of the camera?
Yeah, I think so. One of the photographers we've got featured in the new issue, Daniel Arnold, is a photographer who began taking photographs on his iPhone. And he became known for that. And he did it on a very old iPhone at the time. And what was interesting about him was it wasn't the quality of the photograph. It wasn't seeing a 6x7 negative printed 10 feet tall or anything like that. It was the image and what's happening in the image. So the fact that he was doing it on his phone meant a lot of other people started doing it on their phone. And then it became an Instagram thing. So people are kind of almost prepared to see themselves being photographed.
Where do you want to take this magazine? How do you want it to grow? What kind of things are you still experimenting with?
Well, something we've done with the latest issue, which is out next week, we've introduced writers. So we've commissioned writers, because up until now it's been myself and Josh writing all the content, putting all the content together. And there are lots of voices out there who we value and who we think write some great stuff about photography. So we've commissioned a couple of different people to interview photographers. We've commissioned photo book reviewers. So that's kind of how we'd like to grow it and just make the magazine more inspirational, more of a useful tool for people that want to get into this photography and don't quite know how. So maybe they can get some guidance and some inspiration from it.
Oh, wonderful. And I saw you also have a YouTube channel where my favorite part of it is when you guys actually go out for a day with another street photographer and sort of watch how they do it. Is there anything in particular, any insights or anything you've learned from watching other people do what you guys do every day?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I find it odd. Like, you'd think it'd be quite a similar process for people, but it's just not. People move differently. People have these different ways of interacting with other people. Yeah, I thought I moved quite quickly, and then I went out with Matt Stewart over the weekend, and I was like, oh my God, I can't keep up with this guy. It's crazy. It's been a really great way. The whole thing's been a great excuse to connect with other photographers. When you've been doing it for a decade plus, it's a really great way to selfishly keep yourself motivated and give you a reason to, because, you know, there are peaks, you have highs and lows with it. Sometimes you feel demotivated, but then going out with Matt, that's going to keep me on a high for the next month or so. Then I've got to find my fix somewhere else.
I think there's a lot of chaff on YouTube that you kind of have to separate from the wheat, and just getting like real honest advice from someone that's been doing this for 20, 30, 40 years, I think is so helpful. And I think it's something that we need as well. If we want this little hobby to turn out great photographers, they need to be looking at stuff that's been done in the past.
And finally, we speak with a man that is an Italian magazine legend. Carlo Antonelli edited the Italian editions of Rolling Stone, Wired, and GQ. He also has a close creative friendship and collaboration with film director Luca Guadagnino from Call Me By Your Name. Carlo has a new project, editing Mudec United, a new biannual title from the Milanese Museum of Culture. For each issue, they take as the starting point the current exhibition at Mudec. For the new issue, it's all about exposure. Carlo explains.
How can a catalog produce, can communicate all this work? So Marina thought that maybe making something that is a mixture between a magazine and a catalog, and it's in English, and it can be distributed outside of Milan and circulate in the bookshop of other museum, in newsstands, of course, sophisticated newsstands, could be a better idea. She called me, and we decided together to make something that I called a little paper ship. And this little paper ship is floating all around the world. And it's also like a bottle with a message. It floats, and it goes somewhere. So the work of the museum can be perceived and appreciated by other museums in the world, by scholars, by normal readers. It's a real intersection, it's a real intercommunication between Milan and all the cultures around the world.
And it's definitely not a catalog, which I love about it, but it relates to a current exhibition. So, for example, in the second issue, it's all about exposure. But I love that this is such a vast subject, and there are a lot of interesting pieces on the article. But first of all, explain to us the idea of exposure and of the exhibition and how the new issue relates to it.
It all starts from the temporary exhibition. The first issue was about an exhibition called Rainbow, who started with the repêchage, with the revamp of an incredible 1965 art, let's say, show in San Francisco called the Rainbow Show. And so the exhibition started working around the team, and I started working around the team and exploded it literally. And the second one was about exposing, and in a way exposing ourselves, and in a way exposing objects. And it's related to the windows, the shopping windows, the art of making shopping windows, the exposure of objects and relics, the exposure in art in general, in fashion, art, again, and other fields. It was, for me, particularly difficult to make an issue about it, because for the first time I said, what I'm going to do? And then I have something like an image of the Earth. It's a stupid image, but I have this image of the Earth, and we understood that we are living basically under a display case. This display case as the atmosphere, as the glass, and then as in the display cases in museum, let's say case is full of bad air, dirty air. And we are the entities and living beings and things that are living under it. So basically, I zoom it, and I look at the buildings, and I look at the roads, and I look at the cars like cases, and I look at the airplanes like cases with humans under glasses, and I look at the shopping windows again. And I look at the offices building, and more and more and more I thought about it, and finally something like a journey appeared into my mind, and we worked all together with the museum staff and of course Marina, and the idea was welcomed, and so I started working on the little pieces. I was trying to figure out what was in my mind, and finally understood that in my mind, I'm coming from Genoa, and the Genoa most important museums are the Red Palace and the White Palace, Palazzo Rosso and Palazzo Bianco. And they're very famous because the display was made by an amazing Italian architect and designer called Franco Albini, together with Franca Elg. The original paintings are hanging in the space, literally, with geometric angles, and they are not covered with glass at all. So it was very revolutionary for the time. So from that point of view, we started to design the magazine. We started to design together with FM Studio some crosses inside the magazine in graphic terms. And we also work on the traditional idea of the display of the museum as well. But of course, necessarily we enter into a conversation that I did with Christian Greco, which personally I think is one of the most incredible museum directors in the world, and is the director of the Egyptian Museum in Turin, which is the most important European Egyptian museum, full of incredible stuff, let's say stuff. And Christian was a strong conversation because most of all was about technology, because technology is changing a lot the way we perceive in the moment display, because we can understand from X-ray, more precise tech instruments, and of course the AI, the reconstruction with the AI, we can understand more and more and more about what's inside, let's say, a mummy. But the core of the conversation was, of course, about restitution, was about the fact that if the museum give to, let's say, to the Egyptian museum in Cairo, everything that he has, it becomes an empty museum. And this can be an option, or it can be a museum of copies, or it can be an immersive museum without anything original. But it's clear that we need to find a balance between the fundamental rights, original culture, to have important elements and important relics of their heritage back. So, as I said, it's a necklace, but we also go on and imagine things while we're working, because I think that a real magazine, and I did many magazines in the past, in Italy, and as an editor-in-chief, I think that for me, a real magazine is a magazine when you don't have any idea what will be in the next page where you're flipping the pages. And this is for me very important. This is for me surprise or a jump in the synapses are the most important thing in making a magazine.
And Carlo, I want to ask you, because it's true, you've edited many great Italian titles. You've been working in the industry for a while. Are you still very passionate about magazines? I was just curious, how do you see the magazine scene in Italy, and how nice it is to have a new magazine from the museum that actually is going to be, as you say, not just for people that are visiting the museum, but people, that perhaps are buying the title in another city in Italy or around the world as well.
The first question is very big.
Yeah.
And
I'm curious.
Basically, is a disaster.
Oh, no.
The sales are declining dramatically. It's not a surprise. Like when you go to a train, when you go to with the underground, when you go everywhere else in the bus stop, nobody's reading paper anymore. So it's not surprising that the sales are declining. There are few magazines who are still doing well, or there are some magazines who are really beautiful. And one of those magazines is the weekly supplement of La Repubblica called D. I'm not saying this because I'm a contributor of it, but I'm saying it because I think.
But I love it. I really like it. Every time I go to Italy, I really grab a copy because it's really beautiful.
You see? It's really beautiful, and it's so surprising that such a beautiful magazine is going together with 80,000 copies newspaper, no? So it goes everywhere. And there is a beautifully designed newspaper called Il Foglio that is a small circulation, but is really beautiful in graphic terms. It's very controversial in political terms, but there are great writers working for it. And it's a old-fashioned kind of surprising newspaper. And since 30 years, there is a very important magazine that left-wing oriented, but a great idea, who came from copying Courrier International, which is a collection of foreign press articles that was given to the French diplomats. So it's at least a 100-year-old magazine. And a bunch of guys 30 years ago, around their 20s, decided to, let's say, make the copy out of it, but making it better. And it's called Internazionale. And the selection of articles from the press all over the world is amazing. Why we decided to make a paper magazine, and there is no website, there is no social, let's say, network we decide on purpose to imagine, as I said, a very humble object, a very humble thing, a very humble, precious little thing that we will go around the world. And it's also based on friendship. Normally, magazines are made with friends or people that you know, but nobody shows the, let's say, the web of friendships that is under each magazine. And we decided on the opposite side to show it. That's why the magazine, for a as a subtitle, is called A Tribute to Vision, Outer World, and Friendships, because it's also related to friendship, which I think it's a very important feeling in this moment. It's a very important...
It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing you said there about the web of friendship when it comes to make a magazine.
I think so, because it means that the contribution to the magazine are... I don't want to sound too romantic, but they're more artful, clearly. The way friends are giving you the name of another friend or somebody who really admire is a very interesting, let's say, construction of a web. It was really beautiful to see. And so, like every magazine, we are the second issue, then the third one, like every proper magazine. Now we established like a first range of contributors, and then we will go on with another one. And it's really important for something like Muse to be clear about what it is. And the fact that it's called Music United, it's also another remark of the fact that this idea of being together, this idea of friendship is the engine of this little ship.
Thank you very much, Carlo. For more information, go to mudec.it. And that's it for this week's show. My thanks as ever to Jack Jewers, our editor. If you have any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fb@monocle.com. We're back next Saturday at the same time, 10 a.m. London time. Meanwhile, do subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You've been listening to The Stack. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Until next time, it's goodbye from me.